functional for the help I need, too dysfunctional to feel like I'm actually living. You still show up, you still respond, you still exist on the surface, but underneath, something feels like it has gone offline. Energy is gone, focus is gone, even basic effort feels heavy. You remember who you used to be, decisive, focused, able to move without resistance. Now even small actions feel like pushing through invisible weight. And that creates a quiet contradiction. If you can still function, why does everything feel like a shutdown? Because something in your brain has quietly changed. So what actually happened inside your nervous system? To understand what this feels like from the inside, you have to look at the pattern it creates. Not just exhaustion, but a very specific kind of shutdown. A state where your body is present, but your ability to engage is missing. You sit down to do something simple, and your mind goes blank. Even thinking about starting feels overwhelming. It's like your brain refuses to generate the signal to begin. I have zero energy to even try to care anymore. I can't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. Even simple tasks feel impossible to start. And the confusion deepens when rest doesn't fix it. You sleep for hours, but wake up feeling worse. You try to relax, and your body becomes more tense, not less. My body feels like it's shutting down even when nothing is wrong. Resting doesn't feel safe, it makes things worse. I feel numb, disconnected, and completely drained. This is where the contradiction sharpens. You are not choosing to disengage, but something in your system is preventing you from re-engaging. So why does your brain block effort even when you need it most? To understand why this feels so disturbing, you have to look at the question it creates. Because this doesn't feel like normal exhaustion. It feels like something in you has stopped responding entirely. You try to push through, but nothing happens. No urgency, no drive, no internal signal to move. And that leads to a dangerous conclusion. Did something break in my brain? Why can't I function like I used to? Am I just becoming lazy? The conflict becomes harder to ignore over time. You remember operating under pressure, solving problems, getting things done. Now, the same situations cause your system to freeze or go blank. And the more you try to force yourself forward, the worse it feels. Your body resists, your mind disconnects. Sometimes you can't even think clearly enough to start. Studies of stress physiology show that this pattern is not random. When effort repeatedly fails, the brain begins to change how it responds. But from the inside, it feels like personal failure. So the question becomes unavoidable. If nothing is physically stopping you, why does your brain refuse to engage at all? To understand why your brain resists like this, you have to change the frame entirely. Because this is not a failure of discipline. It is a shift in how your nervous system is operating. What feels like disengagement is not the absence of effort. It is the presence of a different priority. One that is not focused on performance, but on survival. Under prolonged stress, The brain does not stay neutral. It begins to reallocate energy away from effort-heavy systems and toward systems designed to keep you safe. This is where the experience starts to make sense. The shutdown is not random. It is structured, consistent, and biologically driven. Research in neuroscience shows that chronic stress reshapes how the brain distributes resources. Higher-order systems responsible for planning and motivation become less active, while protective systems become more dominant. And this creates the exact pattern you're feeling: less drive, less clarity, less ability to initiate. Not because you don't want to act, but because your brain is no longer prioritizing action. So the question shifts. If this is a survival response, what system in your brain is actually turning motivation off? To understand what is turning motivation off, we need to examine a specific system in the brain. The system responsible for generating drive, effort, and goal-directed action. The dopamine motivation circuit. This circuit is what creates the feeling of, "I can start." It translates intention into movement. It gives tasks a sense of reward before you even begin. Under normal conditions, this system is active and responsive. You think about doing something, and the brain assigns it value. That value creates energy, focus, and forward motion. But under chronic stress, this system begins to change. Not suddenly, but gradually through repeated exposure. The brain starts reducing dopamine signaling to conserve resources. Research in brain imaging shows decreased activity in these motivation pathways under prolonged stress. The signal that once created drive becomes weaker and less reliable. Tasks that once felt manageable now feel disproportionately heavy. This is the shift you are feeling. The intention is still there, but the signal is gone. The circuit that converts thought into action is no longer firing the same way. So when you ask, "Why can't I start?" the answer is not psychological. It is that your brain is no longer generating the signal required to begin. But this is where it becomes critical to understand something else. Because this system wasn't randomly damaged, it was adjusted in response to prolonged stress. So what exactly is suppressing that signal? And can it be turned back on? To understand what suppresses that signal, we have to look beyond the brain. Because the dopamine circuit does not operate in isolation. It is directly influenced by signals coming from the body. Under chronic stress, one signal becomes dominant: cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. In short bursts, cortisol is useful. It increases alertness and prepares you to respond. But when it stays elevated for long periods, its role changes. It begins to interfere with how the brain allocates energy. Studies of stress physiology show that prolonged cortisol exposure suppresses dopamine activity. The brain reduces motivation signaling to conserve resources. At the same time, the nervous system shifts into an energy conservation state. Heart rate variability drops, muscle tone changes. The body prepares not for action, but for endurance. This is where the shutdown feeling comes from. Not just mental fatigue, but a full body signal to slow down, to avoid unnecessary effort. And this creates the paradox you've been experiencing. You want to act, but your body is signaling restraint. You try to push forward, but the system pushes back. So the question is no longer just about motivation. It's about why your entire system is being held in conservation mode even when your life requires movement. To understand what this means for you, we have to bring it back to your experience. Because this isn't just happening in theory, it's shaping how your entire day feels. When you say, even simple tasks feel impossible to start, that's the dopamine signal failing to generate momentum. The task isn't harder, the signal to begin is weaker. When you say, I feel numb, disconnected, and completely drained, that's the nervous system staying in conservation mode. Energy is being restricted before you can even use it. And when you say, I'm so exhausted from fighting my own brain every day, that's the conflict between intention and biology. One system is trying to move forward, another is holding you back. Research shows that when these systems stay misaligned, effort feels heavier than it should. Not because the task is complex, but because the internal cost of action has increased. This is why thinking feels exhausting, why focusing feels unstable, why even choosing what to do can feel overwhelming. So the experience becomes clear. You are not failing to act. Your system is limiting how much action is available. Which leads to the final question. If your brain reduced these signals to protect you, how does it decide when it's safe to restore them? To understand how this system resets, we have to look at how the brain detects safety. Because the dopamine circuit does not simply reactivate on command. It recalibrates based on conditions. The brain is constantly scanning for signals, not just external threats, but internal stability, heart rate patterns, breathing rhythms, energy availability. When chronic stress has been present, the baseline shifts. Neutral states can still be interpreted as unsafe, and this delays the restoration of motivation signals. Research shows that dopamine activity begins to stabilize only when the nervous system exits prolonged threat states, not instantly, but gradually, as the body stops signaling conservation, as internal conditions become more predictable. This is why forcing motivation fails, because the system has not yet detected enough safety to allow energy expenditure. The signal will not return until the environment, internal and external, changes. Instead, recovery follows a different pattern. Small increases in safety, small returns of energy. The system recalibrates in increments, which means the question is no longer, how do I force myself to function, but something more precise. What signals does your brain need to allow motivation to come back online? To understand where this leaves you, we have to look at the system as a whole. Because what feels like shutdown is actually coordination between your brain, your body, and your environment. Your brain reduced the motivation signal. Your body reinforced conservation through stress chemistry. And over time, this became your new baseline. But here's the part most people never see. This state doesn't just switch off when stress is gone. The system remembers. Research shows that after prolonged stress, the nervous system can continue predicting threat even in neutral or safe conditions. And as long as that prediction remains, motivation stays suppressed, which explains something that doesn't make sense at first: why you can finally slow down and feel worse instead of better. So the real question is no longer just about stress, it's about prediction. If your brain has learned to expect danger, what does it actually take to convince it that it's safe again? And more importantly, what happens inside your nervous system during that transition? Because that process determines when your energy returns, when your focus stabilizes, and when your brain finally allows you to move again.